AITAH for not letting my daughter close the door when she's alone with her boyfriend because I caught them kissing once and don't want her to become a teenage mom. I, 46M, am the father of 2 kids, but this story is about my 16-year-old daughter, Sophie, 16F. Sophie is my oldest, and ever since she was born, I've been a very protective dad. I'll be the first to admit that I've always had a bit of a hard time with the idea of her growing up, going from the little girl who used to hold my hand everywhere we went, to now dating a boy seriously and spending time alone with him. I know she's almost an adult, but in my eyes, she'll always be my little girl, and I just can't seem to turn off that protective instinct. Sophie started dating her boyfriend, Mark, 17M, about 8 months ago. He's a nice enough kid, polite, does well in school, has a good relationship with his parents, and from what I've seen, he treats Sophie well. I've met him several times, and I don't have any major complaints about him as a person. The issue is more about the fact that they're teenagers, and teenagers make impulsive decisions. I know what teenage boys are like, I used to be one, and I also know that the teenage brain doesn't always think through the long-term consequences of certain actions. About 3 months ago, I came home from work earlier than usual, and as soon as I walked into the house, I noticed how quiet everything was. Sophie had told me that Mark was coming over to hang out, but I didn't hear them in the living room. So, naturally, I went upstairs to check and see what they were doing. When I got to Sophie's room, I saw that the door was closed, which immediately made me suspicious because we've always had a rule in our house: no closed doors when a boy is over. Sophie knows this rule, and I've made it clear that it's not negotiable. I knocked on the door and waited, but no one answered. That's when I opened the door myself, and to my horror, I found Sophie and Mark on her bed, kissing. Now, they weren't doing anything beyond that, no clothes were coming off or anything, but to me, it didn't matter. Kissing in private like that, with the door closed, is exactly how things escalate. I know how quickly situations like that can get out of hand, and I wasn't about to take any chances. I told Mark to leave, immediately, and I had a long, heated conversation with Sophie about why this behavior was completely unacceptable. I made it very clear that I wasn't angry just because of the kissing, but because I didn't want her to get herself into a situation where things could go too far and she might end up pregnant. Teenage pregnancy is one of my biggest fears as a father, and I wasn't going to stand by and let Sophie make a mistake that could derail her entire future. She's smart, talented, and has so much potential, and I know that getting pregnant at this age would throw all of that away. Sophie argued with me, of course, saying that they weren't doing anything wrong and that I was overreacting. She said that they were just kissing and that I didn't need to freak out. But I wasn't convinced. I told her that as long as she's living under my roof, she needs to follow my rules, and that means no closed doors when Mark is over. Since that day, the no closed doors rule has been strictly enforced. When Mark comes over, they can hang out in her room, but the door has to stay open. I also told her that they should spend more time in common areas like the living room or the backyard where they can be supervised. Sophie hates this rule and has been telling me for months now that I'm being too strict and that I don't trust her. She says that she and Mark are responsible and that they would never do anything reckless or stupid. But I've made it clear that it's not about trust, it's about protecting her from making a life-changing mistake. About a month ago, Sophie told me that Mark wanted to talk to me because he felt like I didn't trust him either. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't really see the point of having a conversation with him, but I agreed to sit down and hear him out. Mark came over one evening, and we had a surprisingly mature conversation. He told me that he understood why I was worried, but that I didn't need to be. He said that he and Sophie weren't doing anything irresponsible, and that they had both agreed to set boundaries for themselves. He assured me that they weren't having sex, and that they didn't plan on doing so anytime soon. He even told me that he cared about Sophie too much to put her in a situation where she might get hurt. I'll admit, Mark handled the conversation better than I expected. He was calm, respectful, and seemed sincere. He even suggested that if it would make me feel better, they could hang out in more public places, like going to the movies or going out for ice cream, instead of always being at the house. He also told me that he had talked to his own parents about our rules, and they seemed to understand where I was coming from. In fact, his parents agreed that the no closed doors rule was a good idea, and they had a similar rule in their own house. After the conversation with Mark, I felt a little more at ease, but I still couldn't shake the fear that something could go wrong. I've seen it happen too many times before. Teenage couples start off with good intentions, but then they let their emotions and hormones get the best of them, and before they know it, they've crossed lines they didn't mean to cross. And once that happens, there's no going back. I've seen how teenage pregnancies can derail someone's entire life, forcing them to give up on their dreams, abandon their plans for college, and struggle with raising a child when they're still children themselves. I don't want that for Sophie. A few days after my conversation with Mark, I decided to talk to his parents directly. I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page and that they understood why I was being so strict. When I called them, they were very understanding and said that they had no problem with the way I was handling things. They even reassured me that Mark was a responsible kid, and that he had always been respectful of their rules at home as well. This made me feel a little better, but it didn't change the fact that I still wanted to keep a close eye on things. Meanwhile, Sophie has been getting more and more frustrated with me. She says that I'm being unreasonable, and that I'm treating her like a child instead of the young adult she's becoming. She's even gone so far as to accuse me of not trusting her, which really hurts because it's not about trust, it's about making sure she doesn't make a mistake that she can't undo. She says that I'm being the asshole for not letting her and Mark have some privacy, but I keep telling her that this is for her own good. I've tried explaining to her that I'm not just trying to control her life, I'm trying to protect her from making a decision that could change everything. Last weekend, things came to a head. Sophie invited Mark over, and they went upstairs to her room. I was in the living room, and after a while, I realized that the house had gotten very quiet. I went upstairs to check, and sure enough, the door to Sophie's room was closed. My heart dropped. I knocked on the door, and Sophie immediately opened it, but I could tell she was frustrated. She snapped at me, saying that they were just talking and that I didn't need to spy on them. I reminded her of the rule, no closed doors, and told her that if she couldn't follow it, then Mark wouldn't be allowed over anymore. She rolled her eyes and told me that I was overreacting, but I stood my ground. After Mark left that evening, Sophie confronted me again. She told me that I was ruining her relationship with Mark by being so strict, and that I was making things uncomfortable for both of them. She said that they weren't doing anything inappropriate and that I was treating them like criminals when they hadn't done anything wrong. She even accused me of pushing her away, saying that if I didn't ease up, she would stop inviting Mark over altogether and just spend more time at his house, where his parents weren't as crazy. That really stung. I don't want to lose my relationship with my daughter, but I also can't let go of my fear that she might make a mistake that could ruin her life. I've told her time and time again that I'm only doing this because I love her and want to protect her, but she just doesn't seem to understand. She keeps saying that I'm being too controlling and that I'm not giving her enough credit for being responsible. My wife has tried to mediate, but she's torn. She agrees with me that we need to be careful, but she also thinks that maybe we're being too strict. She's suggested that we ease up a little and trust Sophie to make the right choices, but I am terrified. So, AITAH,